saw some footage. They attacked some refineries, and Tehran was on fire, and various refineries in the Middle East being attacked. What's the economic fallout?
Now, oil prices have been on a roller coaster and remain quite a bit higher this morning than they have been before the war.
It may well have begun here, an attack by Iran on an oil tanker near its coast.
I think if the Strait of Hormuz is closed and we're in the same energy condition we're in now, in 10 days from now, that's enormous amount of damage to the world economy.
I will not allow a terrorist regime to hold the world hostage and attempt to stop the globe's oil supply, and if Iran does anything to do that, they'll get hit at a much, much harder level.
I know that a number of Republican senators have told the White House. I've spoken to 2 Republican senators who told me this directly. They said, look, if this continues, forget the House, we're going to lose the Senate. And so I think that that's the one voice going into this year. The other one is, see this through. History will make you Trump the hero. You just have to persevere.
It's okay, we ready, here we go. The man, the machine, the legend, the hawk. Amos Hochstein is here with us. He was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Diplomacy, also served as Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs, and last but not least, Special Presidential Coordinator for Global Infrastructure and Energy Security. You have a long list of bona fides, but basically they all say the same thing. This man knows energy security, and we are in an energy security conundrum right now. That's a scientific term. We just got back from Greenland and Venezuela. We're waiting to get into Iran. There's seemingly an interconnected foreign policy blitz going on. But right now, today, and I'm going to reference this, you were on CNBC this morning talking about the biggest shortage of oil in energy history.
When you shut down the Strait of Hormuz, whether by closure de facto or de jure, right? And you have a disruption somewhere in the 10 million barrel of oil plus jet fuel and diesel and other refined products. This is the biggest shortage and energy crisis we've had in global history.
I wanted to jump in right there. And I'm going to date myself here, but I was talking to Alan Greenspan a long time ago. And he said to me, Shane, we're at peak oil. And if you take 15 to 20% out of global supply, it's riots in the streets. And so we seem to be taking 15 to 20% or more out of global supply. So what in God's name is happening, Amos?
Well, it's great to be with you, Shane. We're, as you just said, this is in world history, this is the biggest shortage we've ever had, biggest energy crisis we've ever had.
It's bigger than the 70s?
Yeah. So 1973, OPEC, the Arab states, decide to boycott the rest of the world, the West, partly for 2 reasons. Really, at the time, it was because, just to make this a little bit more close to home for where we are now, the United States and France support Israel in the 1973 war, and as retaliation, they shut down the oil supply. But the interesting thing is it tells you that things are not always as they seem. The war lasted a few weeks. The embargo lasted a few months because what they were really after is reorienting the entire energy system, which they succeeded in. So today,
the strait links the Middle East's crude oil producers to key markets in Asia, Europe, North America, and beyond.
We are at a place where the Strait of Hormuz, right? So for those who don't follow it every day, the oil that comes out of all the Gulf states, so let's say Iraq and Kuwait and Qatar and Saudi and UAE and Oman, all goes through the Strait of Hormuz, which controls the waterway onto the international waters. So from the Gulf of, the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf through the straits. The Iranians have said anything that goes through there, we're going to shoot at it. And so the Lloyd's insurance guys in London say, I'm not giving insurance to anybody to go through there. So immediately everything shuts down. Now, about 20 million, somewhere between 15 and 20 million, at peak it's 20, but on average it's, let's say, 16 million barrels of oil goes through that every single day. In addition to that, you have another 5 million barrels of things like jet fuel and diesel and other liquid products that come in. And on top of that, 20% of the world's LNG, so liquefied natural gas, also every day goes through that. All of that has gone to almost zero.
And fertilizer too, and all kinds of other
fertilizer,
byproducts, yeah.
anything that is made out of oil or made out of gas. So methanol and fertilizer and jet fuels, etc. Now, 2 countries have bypassed pipelines, Saudi Arabia and UAE, but they're limited in how much can go in them. And so you got to choose, am I sending crude oil or am I sending, all this other products, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, all the other things we just said. But they're much smaller. So what happens when you do that is countries that are producers, they start filling all their storage tanks and say, okay, when the war, this will be over in a couple of days and it'll be fine. But then a couple of days go by and 4 days go by and it's not fine. And now my storage is filling up. And if I don't have a ton of storage, I have to start reducing my production because I got nowhere to put this thing, all my oil. So Kuwait has already announced that it cut, somewhere in the range of 50% of its production. The Iraqis are now at around 70% of their production has been cut. The Qataris announced that they've cut all their natural gas production.
And they're one of the biggest in the world.
They own 20% of the whole world's market. So it's crazy, right? So
didn't Saudi announce this morning that they're going to stop production?
So it came out of reports. It wasn't the Saudis themselves, and the Saudis themselves were saying, we didn't really announce that, and so on. Have they stopped production? Yes, they've not all their production, but some production has more danger from missiles. Some is more, so they got to slow down their production because they're going to run out of places to put it, right?
And didn't the Qataris do, like they invoked force majeure and said all contracts are off because of this war?
Yeah. So what really sucks is if you're a consumer of this stuff, you say, okay, if you don't deliver, what's my contract? You deliver me this amount of gas. And if you don't, if you're late, there's a penalty. If you cancel, there's a penalty, a cancellation fee. But if I declare force majeure, meaning this is something out of my control, right? Act of God or act of war, then I declare force majeure and I'm not paying you anything. So now I'm the consumer. I thought I was going to have gas for my electricity or products for whatever. There's no fee, there's no penalty, I get nothing out of that.
So I was just in Venezuela and it was weird. Why? Because you go in there with your discombobulator, that's Trump's word, not mine. You go in there, you bomb some people, you kill the Cuban Praetorian Guard, you kidnap Maduro, and then we were down there less than a month afterwards walking around. It was like nothing happened. We're in there in the oil fields, wandering around, seeing what's going to happen, bringing in American companies. It seemed, and this is a bit of supposition, but it's sort of leaking out of the executive offices now in Washington, that we thought that was going to happen in Iran. There'd be regime change. The people would take to the streets. This would be a few days, and then we'd be hailed a conquering hero, and all the energy would be flowing to us. Now it seems the rhetoric has changed to, well, it might be a few more weeks. It might be boots on the ground, which obviously, reeks of Afghanistan and Iraq, which nobody wants to get into another one of those. What are you hearing? Also, what's the difference between, hey, let's go in and Venezuela this up in a few days versus now this is going to take a few months?
Yeah, I think there are a lot. First, let's unpack what you just said, because I think a lot of stuff that you said is right. There's something called recency bias, right? So what happened to me most recently is the thing that I think is going to happen next. It's not just politicians or citizens. It's also the markets or tacticians. So, hey, I went into Venezuela. Everybody's been scared of this guy Maduro and annoyed by him. I went in. I took him out. I have a successor. Hey, man, this wasn't so hard.
And I
People
get the
are just
oil.
Scared. And I'm going to get there is no oil to get, but I'll get the oil in 5 years from now, right? Because you'll increase the oil production by a little bit. But the place is a freaking basket case. You saw it. It's not exactly.
Well, there's a lot of gas.
West
they have
Texas.
the second largest. Yeah, they have the second largest gas boom, and they're not even capturing. They're flaring and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of economic sort of upside there. But yeah, it's going to take a while.
It's going to take a while. So you say, hey, man, all these gurus that were so scared negotiated with Maduro. I did it I was going to say in a day, but in a couple of hours, right? And so I'm going to go to Iran. everybody tells me that people hate the Iranian, their own people hate them, which is fair. They just massacred like 20 or 30,000 of them.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but what percentage, I don't know. It's a country of 90 million people. They have some support and they have some people who hate them. And so, but I'll go in there. Now, the war kind of had an evolving rationale to it, right? Because this is one of the first times we've gone to war without somebody attacking us, right? So the Iraq war and Afghanistan, you can quibble with, did they actually have the WMD? Did they really support al-Qaeda or not? But we gave a reason, and it actually was months. Remember Colin Powell going to the UN and holding up a vial? It was months of conversation in Congress and media and allies and all that. Here it was kind of like 6 months ago, we did strategic surgical strikes over 10 days, 12 days. The Israelis, and then we came in, we took out the nuclear facilities and we said we obliterated them. It was a massive success. 6 months later, the people in Iran rise up in protest against the regime. They massacre them. And the president of the United States says, he tweets it out, help is on the way. And it's translated immediately in the region and everywhere as we're coming. So really, we're coming because of the protests. But then a few weeks go by and we're sending all this, like the aircraft carriers and all that. And we start talking about, well, it's also about the nuclear. And people say, wait a minute, we obliterated the nuclear 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Why are we going in for the nuclear? And then we say, well, yes, but we didn't do the missiles. But don't worry, it's not about regime change. So then
like
we went
the ballistic
into the war.
capability.
Yeah, they have ballistic missiles they have a lot of them that can reach not us, but they can reach a lot of their enemies
800
and our allies. So they're dangerous. This is an evil regime. There's no doubt about it, man. This is a really evil regime. So now we're in the war, and on the first day we take out the supreme leader, right? His name is Khamenei. He's been there for 40 years. And we take out, he's in a meeting with all of his military leaders, or a bunch of them. And they are all killed. Everybody's killed.
Yeah.
And so the feeling was, maybe this will Venezuela, right? We can Venezuela this thing. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, that's the feeling. But then things don't go as planned. The regime kind of survives the first blow. And it says exactly what it threatened. And it said, we're going to expand the war. So even though UAE or Saudi didn't attack us, we're going to attack them.
It's gotten convoluted, which war
Right.
generally does, and we never know how they're going to end. But what are the immediate effects? Oil obviously went through the roof. Our economy already skittish is now doing this. What have been the immediate effects, and what are some of the long-term effects? And to go back to your earlier statement, how is this, greater than the 70s, which was total energy reshaping of, the global sort of distribution network? Yeah. How can this shape out, and should we be terrified? Because I, for one, am.
Yeah, look, right now, where are we today in this war, right? So we're now on day 9. We're finished day 9 because it was day 9 12 hours ago. And we are now going to look at, we're still bombing, but it's kind of like every day is exactly the same. Every day, we're not really changing materially. So something now is about the length of this war. We're saying it'll take 2 more weeks, but 2 more weeks to do what? In 9 days, we replace Khamenei with Khamenei. So now we still have the Grand Ayatollah Khamenei. We replace the 87-year-old with a 50-year-old. He's in. He's very hardline. He's aligned with the Revolutionary Guard. And we just killed his father, his wife, and his son were all killed in that attack. So if he wasn't a hardliner before, he may be a little bit more hardline now based on that. So where we are on the oil side is that, let's say there was, just before the war, there were 16 million barrels of oil going through the Straits. And today, through the Straits is near zero. You have a couple of tankers going in and out. You have a bunch of Iranian tankers, ironically, going through because they're not shooting their own stuff. So that's going to China. That's going through. And
the Americans
really
let them go through?
Well, we're not there. We're not in the Strait. So they just go and they sail off to China unharmed, which is kind of crazy because the rest of the world is suffering the consequence, but the Chinese are getting oil out of Iran and the Iranians getting paid for it, which is insane. So so we're shutting in all this oil. Now, let's say they can get about 6 million barrels through other routes, right? Through these other pipelines and so on. You're in a delta of 10 million barrels that are missing from the market.
A day.
And the demand in the market is 103, 104 million. So you're at more than 10% of the oil is just not there. And so that's why it's such a huge amount. Now, if the war ends tomorrow, you can reverse it. If the war ends in, what did the president say, maybe 3 weeks? Well, every time you shut in, first of all, it's cumulative, right? So there's more and more missing. So any country, every company is using whatever they had in storage, and then that'll be gone in a few days. And so already you're seeing real shortages in jet fuel or in diesel. Price of gasoline in the United States has gone up to $3.65. It was $2.80, a week ago. And think about it this way. The price of oil before the protests, so like, let's say January 2nd, it was $60. Today it's $96. So that's, a lot, right?
With a bullet. I mean, it's gotten up to as high, and people
like
are saying that, it's going to go up to 120 and et cetera, et cetera.
It can, because right now the crisis is such that if you don't open the straits, every day that goes by, the shortage gets more acute because you can't accommodate for it.
And if it shuts down for a few days and they, maybe we can sort of, get it to start in a few days or a few weeks. But if it shuts down for, let's say, a month, doesn't it take longer to restart, the process,
Exactly.
the flow, the longer it stays shut?
Yeah, bingo. Anything that you shut in, the longer you shut it in, the harder it is to start, and therefore it takes longer. That's especially true with LNG, by the way. This is not just about oil, it's also about natural gas. And that won't impact us in the United States as much, but it's impacting the rest of the world, right? Europe, Asia, that's a lot of Asia, or South Asia. If you're in Pakistan or India, they're already rationing natural gas. They're telling companies, you used to get, X and now you're getting 10% less. And the next thing you'll have to start doing is shutting in certain industries, right? So, hey, I don't have enough natural gas for everybody. So we're going to say this industry has to take a little less, like no more ice cream or beer or whatever. And so that's what you need natural gas. You literally need it for that, the carbon. We went through this, by the way, during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We started talking to the Brits about shutting in crypto and ice cream and beer. And the Brits were like, beer?
What?
No,
beer?
You can
have crypto
beer.
and ice cream, but
exactly,
not beer.
But no beer.
Well, but so that leads us to, so the longer this goes on, the more economic knock-ons it has. So obviously, oil goes up, therefore shipping, trucking, everything, just any kind of movement anywhere goes up, heating goes up, all these costs go up, cost of goods sold. So all products have to sort of, put all these increases into their, airlines, et cetera. So everything goes up. But then when you start sort of adding into that, like, for example, beer, ice cream, and what was the third one? Crypto. Oh, yeah. That's the other thing. So all of a sudden, all these data centers, AI, which I know you're sort of energy AI, very intertwangled. It's another scientific term. There's all kinds of knock-on effects here. AI is a sort of engine that's pushing our economy and doing all these things, AI investment.
And food. Shane, don't forget food.
So tell us about the economic knock-on effects that this is going to have in the longer that it takes.
So if it goes on for longer, we are not a farm-to-table country, right? We're a farm-to-truck-to-table because we move all our food and all our products across the country on trucks, and trucks are using diesel. So as the diesel price goes up, that becomes the input for the food, and food prices go up as a result of all these energy prices going up. So everything we do, we've moved the world. Everything in our lives has become energized, right? Has become energy. So we want to have our ChatGPT or Claude. That requires data centers, which requires energy. Now, in the United States, we're very fortunate. We have a lot of natural gas. We have a lot of coal. We got a lot of oil. We got renewables. but we're very dependent on the rest of the global economy. So if the price of oil goes up anywhere because of a crisis anywhere, it has impacts everywhere, including the United States. And so suddenly things are going to start costing more money. Anything that I import into the United States comes on a ship. The ship is using marine fuel. The marine fuel now is much more expensive and harder to get. Planes are going to start getting flights are going to get more expensive. Tickets for flights because the diesel's more expensive because it's less available. So it has impacts on everything we do. And it's all about the length of time. If it's a few days, people get used to it and you do something about it. And it's kind of like, all right, fine, we'll reverse it later. The longer it takes, the more the impacts start stacking up.
A lot is being made of the U.S. is spending $1 billion a day, which is probably conservative. Qatar is saying we're losing $1 million a minute. Yeah. Wars burn through staggering amounts of money. We saw that with the trillions and trillions sort of lost in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we have energy disruption being a big economic cost of war, which you just said. But we have inflation, shipping, aviation, food prices, global growth, all these things. Now, a lot of people have been waiting for a correction or a recession since 2008. And the markets are very skittish. And, something happens wrong, they go down, and then they slowly come back. Oh, geez, as we've seen with tariffs recently, et cetera. This seems to be like, the godfather of all nightmares, causing us already skittish global economy. That right. If it continues, that we not only have inflation, shipping prices, aviation prices, food prices, everything you just brought up, but then you now have a crisis in confidence. You have people selling off their crypto. You have people selling off their stocks. You have a recession, prices increase, and now we have an economic problem on our hands, much like the 70s, where the energy crisis there brought about a huge...
right?
Exactly, yeah.
And think about it in this context here, Shane. On Friday, this past Friday, we had, on top of everything on the war and the energy issue, we had a jobs report that said when the market was expecting that the government would announce that in the month of February, we added 55,000 jobs. That was the expectation. Instead, the government announced that there was actually minus 92,000. So we lost 92,000 jobs. And if you take all the revisions, basically over the last 12 months, we've added no jobs in the economy. So the economy is a little bit under stress because we have two economies. We have the sort of the AI economy, which is all these companies, Microsoft, Amazon, OpenAI, so on, who are spending, NVIDIA is going to announce they're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's helping the economy, sort of like the market's going ahead, right? On the other side, everything else in the economy is essentially slowing down and grinding to a halt, which is why we're not seeing those jobs. And the AI guys are not adding as many jobs as other businesses would normally do if they were spending that much money, right, on economic development. So manufacturing is down. So if you're an average American who doesn't work in AI and you're not involved in NVIDIA, well, then you're not adding jobs where I am. My gasoline prices now with this war are going up. They went up from $2.80 a gallon to $3.65 a gallon. My guess is that by the end of this week, they'll be close to $4 a gallon. If I drive a pickup that's running on diesel, then it's even probably $4.50 or maybe $5. So now my food's a little bit more expensive. My gasoline to just go to work and pick up the kids is a little bit more expensive. And then you have people asking the question, Shane, all right, so I'm doing this because of this war, but wait, remind me again, why am I in this war? And they don't know how to answer the question.
Yeah, we talked to Bernie Sanders the other day about AI, and he's very worried about it and trying to get Congress to at least talk about it, which they're very reticent to do. But at least he's bringing up the question. You've recently talked about how companies building advanced AI may end up competing for massive government contracts and strategic partnerships. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. I know that there's been, a lot of, talk anyway recently about, defense contracts and energy, being allowed the access to the energy that we that these data centers need, and that AI runs on energy. Maybe talk about AI, energy, how that's sort of interconnected, and how the government is using sort of defense contracts and or energy as a chip in negotiations.
Yeah. So look, a couple of things. One, AI requires it operates based on having a lot of data centers to store the information, to train the AI on, and to deliver the services. And I don't know anybody who doesn't use AI, right? We're using it for everything. And we're going to use it more and more. And so the chips that, whether it's NVIDIA or AMD or others are making, these data centers and these chips they're very energy intensive. You need a lot of energy a lot of power to power them, but also for cooling, because you have to have the room has to be at a certain temperature. You need water for the cooling, so a lot of water. And even though we are making those energy uses more efficient every time a new chip comes out, it's more efficient. What's hidden behind that term, people say, oh my God, it's 30% more efficient, it's 50% more efficient. But it actually uses more energy. That's what they're not saying in the headline. So if I make something 50% more efficient, but it's 100% more powerful, well, I'm still using more energy. It's just on a one-to-one configuration. It's not exactly double. So instead of, I'm giving you 2 times the amount of, data or power, and I'm only using 50% more, not 100% more. Well, it's still 50% more. I'm still using more energy. And I'm building more and more data centers. I need more and more energy. So the correlation between energy and data centers is very high. And I think as a country, I agree, we need to build the infrastructure. We need to build out, because the last thing we want is the Chinese to get further along than we are. Then we're screwed, right? So I think people are now talking about what is appropriate use of AI and all that, but it shouldn't detract from the conversation that we can't just walk away, right? We have to win this battle, because otherwise we will be left behind. The question then becomes, who wins, and is this really a private sector that is competing on normal circumstances? And so your comments that you were quoting that I made last week or a couple of weeks ago, when we see these battles where the government is saying, Anthropic, unless you do exactly as I say, I'm firing you and I'm going to eliminate you. It's not all about Anthropic versus, and for those who don't know, Anthropic makes the AI agent that's called Claude, right? So you have ChatGPT as OpenAI, and Elon Musk with XAI has Grok, and so Anthropic is Claude. And they came and said, well, we have standards. Can't use it for mass surveillance of Americans, and you can't use it for, totally autonomous weaponry. And the Department of Defense said, you can't tell me what to do. I'm never using you again. But it's also other companies that are behind the scenes stirring the pot, right? Because they're competing. Now, in the old days, you compete for your consumer. But what's happening over the last year is that we now have a government that is in control of the economy in ways that U.S. governments, at least not for the last 150 years, has not ever been involved in, right? So the White House decides there's a bid for who buys Warner Brothers, Netflix, or Paramount, and the White House gets involved and decides who's going to buy it. Not every transaction, but every major transaction, the White House reserves the right to get involved and to select the winners. Now, in that environment, you have companies, AI companies, say, wait a minute, I don't want Claude, because if Anthropic wins this contract, that means I don't win it. So now they're going and whispering, and telling, lobbying and so on against Anthropic. So now you have company to company competition for mommy and daddy and the government to decide who wins the fight. I totally get it. If the government's going to make the decision, go to where the decision's made.
And Anthropic's enemies won.
They have XAI and Elon Musk, and OpenAI is the beneficiary, right? So they announce on one day that Anthropic's out, and the next day you have OpenAI wins a contract and says, no, the government didn't ask us to do anything unusual.
if we take this to the macro, the world used to compete for what we're talking about in the beginning, oil fields and shipping lanes and all the things we were talking about. And now we're competing for chips, data centers, and the energy needed to power and fuel AI. Is AI creating a sort of new geopolitical power map?
Oh, 100%. 100%. But I don't think it's instead of. We always thought, look, oil and gas is like the geopolitics of the past, the 20th century, big wars, the embargoes. And unfortunately, oil is found in only certain countries. You go there and whoever plants the flag, it's ours. And then we say, that's going to be replaced by renewables. But instead of renewables, which I'm a big fan of, they're not a replacing of oil and gas. They are in addition to. Like oil and gas would be much more expensive if we didn't have renewables, because energy demand is growing so fast that even if renewables grows 100% every year, which it did for a while, the pie got bigger. So you think about all the renewables that we've added since 1980. In 1980, the share of energy in the mix of oil and gas in the mix was 80%. Then we added all of this renewables, and what is it today? 80%. It's amazing. And we built massive amounts of renewables. Now you think if we didn't build it, oil and gas would be even more expensive, right? Yeah. So now you have that. And then comes AI. And this is the motherlode of all competitions. It's no longer, and who are the countries that are competing? China and the United States. Number one is the United States right now. Number two is China, but not at a very big distance, right? They're very close and they're closing the gap. The problem is there's no number three. Like Europe doesn't exist in this battle. Everything is between the United States and Europe and China. And if you want to talk about who are the next big implementers of AI, who know how to do it really well, it's tiny countries like UAE and Singapore, the two smartest countries on AI outside of the US and China. Not and France Israel. Or the UK. Israel's really good, but technologically, AI is a new thing for them. They're now coming into the fight really hard, but they're so good at technology that but they're not going to be a powerhouse the way the US. They're not competing with the US and China, right?
No, I'm just adoption.
Right. But you're right. Small countries, UAE, Singapore, Israel, right? So this is now the biggest geopolitical, because this is going to determine the future. Who is going to set the rules for AI, the US or China? Who's going to have data centers around the world? So when some kid in Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America goes into their AI and asks questions like, is democracy good? Well, if it was trained in China, the answer is going to be no. Is the United States an evil empire, right? Well, some of the answer will be yes. So no. the decision of what is fact and what is true, that's what's being determined in this race. Who is going to and then think about all the applications, robots and cars that use AI. Where are they going to get trained? Who's going to lead the way? And I'll show you examples of what happens when we lose. We used to have 30% of solar industry. Today we have 2%. China has the rest. We used to be the lead in electric vehicles, right? When Tesla came out, it was like we were the lead. Today we're at not even second place. We're a distant second. The Chinese totally dominate the entire electric vehicle market. They have better electric vehicles, and they have many more brands, and they're selling, and they control the world market. Yeah, they're cheaper, right? You can buy one for $12,000, and it's a good car. And so if you lose the battle, you really lose. We did silly things like when the Chinese started taking over our market, we sued them in renewables. We sued them. And we ended up in court for like 3 years. This was like back in 2011, I think, or 2012. And we won the case. When we filed the lawsuit, we had 30% of the market. When we won the case, we had 2% of the market. And they were like, okay, we lost in court, but we own you now. We literally own you. And that's what could happen here. But here's the trick. Instead of this being the new battlefield geopolitically around the world, instead of what was oil, they're combined now.
Yeah, when I talked to Bernie, he's saying all the right things, which is like, look, this is a bigger, transformative time than the Industrial Revolution. And should we not stop and take a breath and say, is this better? Is this worse? There's going to be a lot of workers affected. Trucks, trucking is the biggest employer in America, and trucks go away, cabs go away, all this stuff. White collar workers, it goes on and on. And he's right and rational, except for the fact that, okay, if you stop or slow it down, China takes the lead, and then you're in trouble there. And then there's quantum, which I won't even start, because why?
Yeah.
I want you to close your eyes, and I want to go back to the headlines. I want to go back to Straits of Hormuz are closed except for a few Iranian ships, ironically. Energy has stopped shipping. This could be the greatest energy crisis, but it could lead to one of the greatest economic crises. So what I want you to do is close your eyes and say, okay, if you can do three, I want three. I want best case, worst case, and then if you close your eyes, what do you really think is going to happen in the next 1 to 2 months, and what are the knock-on effects?
Best case, by the end of this week, let's say Thursday, the president goes out and says, all right, folks, I won.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished, right? Without a banner this time. Yeah. And I say, hey, guys, I downed a third of their boats from their Navy. I've sunk them. I've taken out almost their entire Air Force. I have taken out their nuclear capability even further than I did last June. I've disrupted a large part of their ballistic missile capability. I've set their economy back a generation at least. And I have gained total air superiority over Iran. So I'm going to stop the war now. I'm going to let the Iranian people decide if they want to replace their regime by going out and demonstrate. I'm going to fly my planes over my spy planes, right? Called ISR, right? Surveillance and intelligence and surveillance over Iran. And if they go back to their bad behavior of supporting, terrorist networks around the world or rebuilding nuclear, I'm going to bomb them again. And I have credibility because I just did this, right? And I'm here. I'm going to take most of my toys away, but I'm going to leave a few toys behind. Israel, I already talked to Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. He's stopping as well. The Iranians are going to stop. Strait of Hormuz opens, and we're back to some kind of containment of Iran. He struggles with that, but that's best case scenario in my mind. Worst case scenario, we get pulled in further and further. President says, no, I have to be seen as total victory here. I said surrender. They have to surrender. And so unconditional. Where, by the way, unconditional surrender. But then his spokesperson went on TV and said, well, what unconditional surrender means, if the president determines that they've been weakened and therefore he can stop. I was like, so unconditional surrender means neither unconditional nor surrender.
Or surrender.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is we just keep going. The war continues and the president doesn't really see good off-ramp, so he just keeps at it. The Iranians lob him. Yeah, it's a missile here, a missile there. All they have to do is take out one tanker every week and nobody touches the waters no matter what happens, right? One drone hits one tanker, boom, nobody touches it. And so the disruption just continues and the White House struggles with, we don't really know what our objectives are anymore. We just need to disrupt a little more. And then maybe they even send in ground troops and now they do some kind of, there's a lot of chatter about taking over, sending ground troops into an area called Isfahan, which is one of the nuclear sites, and they will take out the nuclear material. And then he'll be able to say, look, I really had a victory. But that's really risky for a variety of reasons. So those are the sort of the edges.
Of a huge army.
Or just special operations. But what happens if, since they've been talking about it on social media, the Iranians get into a gun battle, they shoot them, or they even, God forbid, they take hostages. Now we're even in worst case. So that could get out of hand. That's the worst case because the markets are freaking out at this point. The oil markets are going haywire. Americans are paying massive amounts of money for ordinary products and food and goods. And that's the worst case. The base case, right? What I think could happen, I have a very highly doubtful that by the end of this week, so today is what is today? The 9th. So the next 4 days, by the 12th or the 13th, I highly doubt that he'll quit because he'll be afraid that best case scenario, people will say to him, well, you did it, but then markets went down, oil prices went up, and he ran away. So he'll be afraid of that. What do I think is the most likely is he doesn't want to be in this in 3 weeks from now. There's no good that comes from that. I think what he likely does is he waits another full week or 10 days. So towards the end of next week. And then he can say, no, it wasn't the markets. The markets went down already a week ago. I kept going. And then he comes up with some kind of victory narrative. And so that's probably where I think we end up going. Not because we need to be there, but I think, Shane, that we have like diminishing returns unless we do something different, like putting ground troops on the ground, this is like diminishing returns. We're just bombing more of the same type of stuff. All the Iranians need to do is survive.
Yeah, I saw some footage of they attacked some refineries and Tehran was on fire and refineries on fire and I think you saw some footage of various refineries in the Middle East being attacked, which is going to have a knock-on effect. But so let's say the base case happens. In let's say 2 weeks, we say, okay, we won and maybe there's a special forces thing and we got all the atomic stuff. What's the economic fallout?
So I don't think 2 weeks. I think he has to get out for there not to be like 10 days, like before next weekend, right? So Wednesday, Thursday next week. I think if the Strait of Hormuz is closed and we're in the same energy condition we're in now in 10 days from now, that's enormous amount of damage to the world economy. And it will be too late for it to be just, we can just turn this all back on and everything will be fine. I think at that point you get lasting damage to the economy. And we're sitting here in March, we're still in the summer. We're going to be thinking about this and feeling the effects of it. And I think people's in their psyche, like, what did we do this for? Which is a shame because we're losing sight of the real important issues because we're getting clouded by, sort of a mission. When you go in with no real mission goals, then you're constantly looking for them as you keep going. And the wishful thinking goal that escaped you on day 2 or 3, it's gone and you can't recreate it. So
his advisors must be coming to him. I mean, they're smart guys and they must be coming to him and saying, hey, we're going into midterms and if the economy is tanked, we're going to have some trouble. And maybe his party is saying this too, or some smart people must be saying, if this goes on much longer, there's going to be, a lot of economic fallout. If there's economic fallout, our party's not going to be as popular as it should be or once was or whatever. So he must be getting pressure saying, look, if the economy tanks, it's going to be a lame duck presidency. We're going to lose House and maybe Senate and have fun.
Look, you're right. I think he's getting 2 different voices in his ear. One is saying to him, hey, we knew that we were going to lose the House. We Republicans, right? But we weren't going to lose the Senate, and we can survive losing the House. We'll figure it out. Now he'd come to him and say, hey, and I know that a number of Republican senators have told the White House. I've spoken to 2 Republican senators who told me this directly. They said, look, if this continues, forget the House. We're going to lose the Senate. Like, if we're going into an election, you're asking us to go into an election with, what are we supposed to say? They voted for you for a few things. 1, never going to go into foreign wars. 2, energy prices are going to come down. 3, oil prices are going to come down and the economy is doing better. Now you want us to go back to the same election and say, hey, we did do a foreign war. Prices are higher than they were under Biden. And even energy prices are higher. We were supposed to be the energy guys. And so what are we supposed to run on? What's the accomplishment that we have? And so I think that that's the one voice going into this year. The other one is see this through. History will make you Donald the Conqueror, Trump the hero, and you just have to persevere. And we just need to get more people to get in the fight. I mean, did you see Lindsey Graham tweeted today against Saudi Arabia, and he's one of their biggest allies, saying if you're not going to join the war for real, then there'll be consequences. Like we're threatening the Saudis to join the war. I think it's coming from stress of the people who are supporting the war, of saying we need to get some wins on the board here. And perhaps if we can expand the coalition, they'll do it. But those are the two voices that are going into Donald Trump's head and in his ears right now.
One of the most amazing turnarounds in modern geopolitics is Russia, the boogeyman, to Russia, our best friend. And I found that the Republican adoption of, Russia's now great, and we should be more like them. And you have Tucker Carlson walking around Russia saying, this is amazing here. Look at these supermarkets. And it just became like a Republican thing and whatever. Now that the Russians are helping the Iranians target American bases, doesn't that have some geopolitical fallout, or has that all been said in the Ukraine anyway, and we're done with that?
You'd think that, if anyone, forget Russia, if anyone was helping my enemy with intelligence to direct them towards my assets and giving them coordinates, that we would declare them an enemy. Literally on the same day that it was reported that the Russians were doing this, we waived the sanctions against them. Now, you want to talk about a winner in this war? The Iranians have lost. The Israelis, I don't know if the Israelis have won or lost. We are paying some economic price for it. But the winner, hands down, is Putin.
Yeah.
Hands down. Let me give you one example, just because how big energy an issue it is. 2 weeks ago, Putin cannot sell all of his oil. A portion of it is basically in storage. And the oil that he is selling, he's selling at a steep discount. So when the oil price in January is 60, he's selling it for like 50, 48, 49, 50, 51, somewhere like that. Now you wake up a couple of days ago on Friday, the same day we reported that he's helping the enemy, we waived the sanctions so India can buy Russian oil. Now the Russians tell the Indians, whoa, no more discounts. Why should I discount? You need me right now. So you don't want to buy it? Fine, don't buy it. And I'm not under sanctions. It's not risky.
And why take off the sanctions? Because we have to have the oil, or India
Correct.
has to have the oil, or it's economic
we have a
collapse
disruption.
for India.
The same disruption that the government just said is not a big deal to the market, they're opening the sanctions because it is a big deal. And now think about it this way. Putin's selling 2 weeks ago oil for 50. Today he's selling it for 95. He was losing on the battlefield in Ukraine for the last few months, and his economy was going through the shitter. Now, he's making $90 a barrel. That's almost double what he was selling before.
And there's a lot of rumor, myth, and innuendo about this might have a knock-on effect on Taiwan because, America is allowed to go into Venezuela, America is allowed to go into Iran. Well, we're taking Taiwan, which is part of China now, so sucks boo to you.
And do you think Tucker Carlson and Republicans are going to say, we have to go defend Taiwan?
No one. I mean,
how many Americans say, I need to go to war in Taiwan right now?
With China, which is off of China. We spent a lot of time in the South China Sea and a lot of time reporting on that issue. And you're like, look, any posturing about going to the South China Sea with the American Navy versus is total insanity. It cannot happen. But then you get back into the chips and the majority of the chips being made in Taiwan. I mean,
exactly.
Basically, I have an overall question, which is, do you think in the next month that it's safe to say that what happens as goes Iran and the Gulf, so goes the geopolitical map of of the world for the next 6 to 10 months?
I don't know, because it depends how it ends, right? So if it ends in the best case, then I think that in 3 months from now, none of us are talking about it. It's kind of like it happened, but the status quo is kind of the same. I don't really
It's
tell the
Venezuela.
difference. Yeah. Except that Iran is still the bad guy. I'm kind of stuck there, but we're probably a couple of years away from anything happening again, right? Because we sorted that for a few years. But if anything beyond that happens, and we're also depleting our munitions and so on, I think the rest of the world says, all right, America didn't achieve very much. They kind of threw everything they had at it with the Israelis, who have the best intelligence in the world and some of the best fighters in the world, and still, marginally. What does this mean for the world order? I think then people will look past us.
Look, I want to keep the lines of communication open, because I think it's going to be ongoing, and there's going to be a few curveballs sent in over the next few weeks. The more I think about this, the more questions I have. So come back on. Let's talk in a couple of weeks and see if it's best case, worst case, in which we're all doomed, and I'll meet you in the root cellar. Oh, one last question.
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem to you, you're an expert on security and not just energy, but I mean, all the, armies and the fallout and all the different stuff. Doesn't it seem to you, if I'm Iran and I'm the Revolutionary Guards, I'm the Ayatollahs, I'm the regime, and I've just been soundly whooped by conventional weapons, that the only way I can exist as a revolutionary Iranian state is if I have atomic weapons? It seems to me proof positive that their argument is, if we're going to be alive, which is, by the way, Israel's argument, we have to have nukes.
Yeah, look, I think they're going to reach two conclusions. They may reach that conclusion, but they also know that had they never had the hubris of being a nuclear power, we're probably not in this war, right? Or in the previous one. And so they'll have to weigh, is it more beneficial to just say, hey, we're not going to go nuclear, even though it's our right to do it. Like, we preserve the right, but we won't actually do it because the last thing we want to do is get another whooping. And we gotta rebuild. We don't have a lot of money, and the destruction across the country is massive. But the other thing that we got to think about is, Iran's kind of a relic, right? The future of warfare that we're seeing, that what we're using, the Israelis' technology, this is the last vestiges of those kind of wars. We're going to be using more and more AI. We're going to be using lasers. The Israelis and the Americans were both developing these counter-drone lasers that we're spending $2, $3 to take out a drone instead of, $1 million to take out a $20,000 drone. The rate of advancement. So if they're smart, and I don't know that they are, by the way, everybody likes to say the enemy's smart. I don't know if they are. They've made really bad decisions over the last couple of years. But what if, it's really what they need to do is say, shit, we're like a relic of the past. Terrorists and drones and missiles and so on, when the rest of the world is advancing on technology, right? Where the weapons of the future are going to look very, very different. And robotics, they don't have any of that. None of it. They may go to the Chinese and say, you know what? Screw nukes. Can you share with us, since you're our allies, can you share with us some of this AI stuff, right? Can we get the robotics? Can we get things that are harder to detect and more useful in the battlefield of the future? So I worry that that's the direction that they try to go in.
Right. Why not go to Pakistan and say, hey, you've got nukes, give us some. We'll give you money.
Well, first of all, the Pakistanis are Sunnis, the Iran's Shias. I don't know that Pakistan is loyal and has a defense pact with Saudi Arabia that is an enemy of them. So the Pakistanis are not going to do it. And they would have done it by now. They're pretty disciplined about this. They're pretty good. But again, I think the bigger danger, we can detect their nuclear work. My fear is that they try to advance technologically. I don't want the bad guys to start advancing in AI. They're already advancing fast enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that light note, thanks for your time. Fascinating stuff. And let's hope it's best case or base case and not worst case.
Look forward to coming back. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
All right.